Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, the Wise Guy, and today is December 29th, 2024, and I thought I would fill in everyone on a quick little update. Normally, I plan on taking Sunday kind of easy, so I can work on some other side work and some research for the upcoming week. So this is going to be kind of a rarefied segment, admittedly, but one that I think needs to be mentioned before it is twisted into another gaslighting session by Trump supporters when it comes to Ukraine. So if you dig news, history, and general Americana, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I'd be much obliged. So sit a spell. Take your shoes off. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, there have been those on the political spectrum who have seen it for what it actually is, an incursion into sovereign territory by an expansionist authoritarian who wants to try and leave a legacy behind of rebuilding the old Soviet bloc. Putin has actually made this abundantly clear. He can try and obfuscate and lie, but this has been a goal for decades. And he's already shown that he is willing to do some rather horrifying things to try and maintain his narrative and exploitation of his own people. Keep one thing in mind going forward: false pretense. Vladimir Putin has one game, and that's to muddy the waters, not twist minds in favor of him. That's what many people don't actually understand. The Americans who are not supportive of Ukraine are not necessarily supportive of Putin either. As much as this doesn't really make sense, folks need to understand that Putin's goal isn't for you to pick sides. It is to create so much confusion in the media space and apparatus that people have a difficult time telling which side to choose from. It also helps reinforce more nativist ideals when the world seems too complicated, that it's best to just kind of slink back home and keep the blinds shut. It's easier to just assume that everybody is shitty and just refuse to take part in the reindeer games. He doesn't care if you're with him or against him. The point is that you shut up and leave him to his devices. Best example of this occurred in 1999. In September of that year, a series of blasts rang out in three Russian cities across the country. At the time, Vladimir Putin was just prime minister and had not long prior been a member of the KGB. His handling of the event actually gained him massive popularity among the Russian people, as he blamed Chechen militants for the bombings, although they never took responsibility for them. And that should have been the first red flag. During this period, fear and panic spread through Russia because over the course of this time when the bombings were occurring, 307 people died. More than 1,700 people were injured and homes were destroyed. Then everything changed on the 22nd of September. In a city called Ryazan, a suspicious device that was incredibly reminiscent of the bombs used in the other terrorist attacks was found in a basement of an apartment building. Sound familiar? After praising the citizens of the city for finding the device, Putin then ordered the air bombing of Grozny in a then sovereign Chechnya. 3 people were arrested for having been found planting the devices, but all of them were members of the Russian Federal Security Service, the body that all but replaced the Soviet KGB and is colloquially referred to as the FSB. The next day, the director for the FSB stated that the event was merely a drill. The devices only contained sugar, and then freed the agents that had been held since their capture. While the Russian state used this as a means to justify their invasion and eventual absorption of Chechnya back into the Russian Federation, I believe April the following year. At the time, Islamic extremists were to blame, and while all of the suspects who had been accused of committing the bombings were killed, no independent investigations were allowed to occur. Putin's government wouldn't even let its parliament look into the bombings. And 2 key members of a commission calling for the investigations have since been assassinated, allegedly. The lawyer and investigator of the investigations themselves, he was arrested and then sent to prison for, quote, revealing state secrets. Russians to this day continue to blame Islamic terrorists out of Chechnya for the attacks, but to this day, there also remains no conclusive guilt that has ever been reached. Historians and investigative journalists alike outside of the Russian state have determined that these were actually false flag operations, perpetrated by the state in order to manipulate the citizens to support Putin and his invasion into Chechnya. You're free to look a little deeper into it, and I'll try to post a link to a really solid investigation into this whole thing. It's actually really intriguing when considering recent turns of event. MAGA voters and Republicans alike, who are ironically against the defense of Ukraine, given Ronald Reagan's historic stance against Russia during the 80s, are being seen as supporting Putin, and that may actually kind of be losing the plot here on this. To be honest, I just don't think they support either side, and the reasoning behind this is due largely to the unyielding propaganda that has convinced a large portion of that base to believe that the Jewish man who is currently leading the fight against Putin's forces is actually a Nazi. Are they fully convinced? Probably not, but that's not the point. They're convinced enough to be goaded into thinking that we just shouldn't put any money or resources there. Then there are the unsubstantiated claims with Hunter Biden that turned out to be Russian propaganda, and then the premise that the U.S. is somehow laundering money through Ukraine, which, I mean, if that's your position, I wonder what gives you the impression that the United States needs or even wants to funnel money. And even then, why wouldn't they just do it through Azerbaijan, like everyone else? And that brings us to today here in America, and the very interesting news that it seems that along with lying to his voters about immigration and their cost of living, Donald Trump is also reportedly pivoting his stance on Ukraine as well. Reports indicate that Donald Trump will indeed come to the challenge of meeting our near-peer competitors on a global stage and not only continue, but actually increase defense spending for Ukraine in the coming months. So realism actually seems to be taking hold among the MAGA leaders that there is importance of maintaining democracy in Eastern Europe against tyrannical, expansionist Russian forces. Discussions between the incoming administration and our allies indicate that they will actually also keep trying to increase GDP levels into NATO defense, which also just bolsters the strength of NATO, as they also express a clear like-minded goal to remain strongly in support of the alliances that we have held firm for decades. The word describing our support for Ukraine by the incoming administration that's been thrown around is, quote, unconditional, for whatever that's worth. So while he's talking out of both sides of his mouth to supporters, he seems also poised to continue Biden's policies and strategies. He's also backing the man who called his voters lazy and retarded and openly calls for all of them to be replaced by foreign workers. And he's planning on going full steam ahead on screwing over every American consumer with his tariffs and price gouging. I would like to say I saw this coming, and in some cases I did. I thought there would be maybe a chance that he would go back on his promises and continue the status quo while absolutely taking credit for it the way he did with NAFTA. I just really honestly didn't think he would be so open to so many liberal ideas. Although a pleasant surprise that his incompetence may actually be catching up to him fast enough to slap him on that pink ass of his, or he legitimately has no plans for anything. I'm not going to be clapping for this dude. I'm going to stand back with my arms crossed, shaking my head with the biggest shit-eating grin on my face. Because his supporters can do only one of two things now. They can either buck up and admit they were wrong, and that all of the folks that they have treated like shit for almost a decade may have had a bunch of good points about this grifter, or they're just going to have to try and make us believe that none of who they have been actually happened. Nothing that they ever said, none of the shitty words, and none of the shitty things that they did. None of it happened. It was all an illusion. This is gaslighting. This is a manipulative way to get you to question yourself and not what you clearly remember. It's also a way for them to run briskly away from their own responsibility as they cry, both sides, they're all shitty. Which, again, that's Putin's game. Muddy the waters to get people to believe that none of this is real and that you can't support any of them because they suck all equally. Coincidentally enough, this will come from a person who has and always will choose one side consistently. Guaranteed. It's all mind games. The best way to defend yourself from them is to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay decent. Y'all come back now. You hear?